Okay, good evening everyone, and welcome to our special council meeting of Monday, June the 8th. I do wish to begin tonight by formally recognizing that we are gathered and meeting upon the territory of the Sooke Nation. And as is the tradition of 7 o'clock, I do wish to sound the gavel as a reminder to thank our essential and frontline workers. For those of you observing the webcast, I do wish to share that Councillor Tony St. Pierre is in attendance virtually tonight. And so you won't be able to see him, but we will be able to hear him and work with him tonight through the technology that we have here in Chambers. So thank you, Councillor St. Pierre. It's a good way for us just to try out the new technology all at the same time. So a few updates. As many may know, my mayoral address is from Chambers at 1 o'clock that I was doing throughout the provincial state of emergency have ended, and I'll be using just a few minutes of this time as we call the meeting to order just to give any new updates. And so while we do remain under a provincial-wide state of emergency, our Sooke emergency program has been scaled down to level 1. Our municipal hall has reopened to the public, and we've been advised that there's been a real uptick in queries over the telephone, and we have now begun to receive our property tax collection, and we're roughly the same rate as previous years. Also would like to share that all of our parks have reopened, as you may know, and all of the playground equipment that had been previously closed off is open and available for use at families' discretion. So it'll be up to parents to decide whether or not they wish to go to the park, but we all know that active play is important for our children, so we'll leave that at the discretion of each individual family. The community would also like to know that all of the provincial parks and campgrounds have also reopened, and this includes the private campground on Phillips Road, operated by the Sooke Community Association, and I see that pickleball courts, tennis courts, and the like are also open and enjoyed by many of our residents. For those of you that are wishing to visit one of the provincial parks or campgrounds, we just suggest that you look at their own safety protocol information prior to arriving at that site. So other than that, the Capital Regional District continued to meet in a virtual form, but starting this Wednesday, the entire board is welcome to return back into the boardrooms. So I will be doing that this coming Wednesday. Committee activity that was suspended will be gearing back up starting in July. And Victoria Regional Transit has a meeting scheduled for next week, but it will be a virtual meeting with some platform, as the boardroom there is very small and very tight, and it would be impossible to maintain physical distancing in that particular room. So other than that, that's sort of all I had. I just wish to remind everyone that we are thinking of you, and just wish you all the best in health and to keep well. So on that note, I'll turn our attention to our agenda tonight. And council, we do have our meeting agenda in front of us with the addition of we do have some new business and supplementary information, and I believe we have one item of correspondence from members of the public that we'll read out once we get to that. So I'll look for council to please approve the agenda as presented with inclusion of the new business items.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Beddoes and seconded by Councillor St. Pierre. Any questions on the agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? You're in favor, right, Councillor St. Pierre? Okay, just check. All right, and that's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, public question and comment period. I'll turn to our corporate officer. Is it just the one piece of information that we have? The one correspondence?
Yes, Your Worship, it is.
Okay, so I'm just going to pull that up. And I had a brief conversation with our corporate officer today, and what I had suggested is that I will read out the public submissions, and if they are lengthy, then I will read the first 2 minutes of the item. and the rest of it council will have, but there was some concern that items may not have been received, but this way, by me reading it out, those that have provided the letter will know that we have in fact received it, and we're acknowledging it in this way. So, and if we receive, say, 10 pages of documents, I'll read 2 minutes worth of that particular submission. So on this one, I'm just going to start. And this was submitted today by Christina Schlattner, Catherine Keoghan, Susan Clark, Kyle Tapalco, Andrew Moore, and Councillor St. Pierre. Dear Honourable Mayor and Council, as you deliberate upon the OCP review and selection of the next consulting team and advisory committee, we urge you to amend the draft OCP advisory committee terms of reference to include climate-specific representation on the advisory committee and the climate goals within the District of Sooke most recent strategic plan. The province of BC's Climate Action Toolkit states that an OCP is possibly the most important plan in a community for reducing emissions, and that taking action on climate change can strengthen an integrated sustainability agenda that advances fundamental economic, social, and environmental priorities in the community. Provincial requirements for OCP development include greenhouse gas reduction targets, policies and actions, and indeed the Local Government Green Community Statutes Amendment Act Bill 27 in 2008 introduce these changes specifically to enable local governments to address climate change in their communities. Our challenge now is to develop the OCP in a way that makes these targets, policies, and actions truly meaningful. We are encouraged to see Dialogue, the consulting group of companies under consideration by the district, has extensive experience in this area, including the development of North Cowichan's Climate Action Plan. While expertise on the consulting team is a great start, we believe the advisory committee must include someone to advocate on behalf of climate mitigation and adaptation. We believe the recommended addition of someone to represent general environmental stewardship is not strong enough on point. While groups like Transition Sooke and the District of Sooke Climate Action Committee will hold stakeholder status in the OCP, this is not an adequate substitute for having climate representation on the OCP Advisory Committee. Although stakeholder input is a critical part of public engagement, the existential threat of the climate emergency merits greater attention than mere input. It must be a total focus for the entire process. The climate emergency frames everything related to human activity and is an overarching principle that should guide this OCP development. And I'll leave it at that as I'm over time now. So we have the rest of it, but I just wanted to share that we did receive it. I have read it out, and we are acknowledging and trying to encourage and include public input as best as we can. Okay. So on that note, moving along, that brings us right into our report section, 7.1, which is the OCP Consultation Selection. And I'll turn this over to staff to introduce us to this matter tonight.
Thank you. This report is outlining staff's review and recommendation for the selection of a OCP consultant to help with the development of our official community plan. With the review, we had 9 proposals that were submitted, and in Table 1, which is included in your report, you'll see the bulk of where most of the fee schedules that were proposed within these proposals range. So the majority anywhere from 183 to 199,000, with the lone one at 150,000 at the bottom there. So we're really pleased to see the turnout of proposals that were received. Based on our review, the staff selected Dialogue as the preferred consultant based on going through the immense criteria that we had listed in the request for proposal, as well as any value-added components that each consultant considered. So with Dialogue, what they're proposing is a multidisciplinary firm which consists of planners, urban designers, architects, engineers, and engagement specialists. On top of that, they have a list of sub-consultants that they're also proposing to assist with the development of the OCP, including Watt Consulting Group, which would be looking at municipal transportation, Sustainable Solutions Group, which focuses on climate change, as well as Colliers International, which would be looking at the land economics component of the OCP, and lastly, Liquor Geospatial Consulting, which would assist in the geoinformation systems type mapping, which is also included as part of infographics that display stats and other pieces of information in a more visual format for the reader. So those are just kind of the key points in looking at their project team. In addition to that, they have immense experience with developing OCPs, not only within the province, but the firm itself across the entire country. So bringing a lot of experience across the country and ideas and concepts that have worked elsewhere that could potentially work for Sooke as well. Looking at engagement strategies, that was another key piece that staff were considering in the review, mainly because of the COVID pandemic. How are we going to be able to effectively reach out to citizens to gain their feedback? So some of the concepts that they were proposing was interactive MetroQuest surveys, live stream presentations and Q&A sessions using Facebook or Zoom, along with a strong social media presence on Instagram, Twitter, and Reddit. So based on their past experiences developing similar OCPs, they used a lot of social media outside of a pandemic scenario. So what their proposal includes is a lot more robust use of that, and learning from their past experiences of what have been effective social media and other online interactive mediums to gain that engagement and input ability. As well, they'll be following the pandemic very closely to see if and when appropriate, that they could do more in-person physical type engagements. But for the meantime, this was their proposal to address those guidelines based on social distancing. So overall, going through all of the proposals, again, we felt Dialogue had the best proposal that met the criteria of the request for proposal. And the value for the budget that they were proposing included a well-experienced team, a lot of dedicated hours to the project, and a lot of different engagement strategies that made it the best value for this project. One of the other pieces we felt just going through the proposal, that based on current plans that we're working on, like the Transportation Master Plan and the Parks Plan, we would work with the consultant to identify if there's any additional refinement that we could make to the proposal, just to focus on certain areas that we might already have the information, and make sure that we're dedicating that feed to the proper areas, so that if we already have certain work completed, that we can speed up the process and focus our efforts on other areas. But as a whole, the proposal was very impressive, and that's why we've selected Dialogue as the recommended consultants for Council to endorse. The proposal has been attached for your review with this report, and with that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Paulo, for both for your presentation and for the written report. Questions, comments from members of Council? Councillor Bateman, then St. Pierre, please.
Yeah, thank you for this presentation. Dialogue is clearly one of the leading lights among consultancy firms, I think, in North America and in Canada, and they've done an awful lot of work. I have a few questions. Who comprised our selection committee?
The selection committee was comprised of department planners, including myself.
Strictly the planning. Okay. Strictly the planning department, yes. So I do understand our senior planner did work with the prospective project lead on the Colwood OCP and some others principals in the team. That's correct, I think.
That's correct. There's previous experience, as well as other proposals. Other review committee staff also have familiarity with other project teams based on other consultants. But yes, in terms of Dialogue, there is past staff experience with their project team selected members.
I see that in their package, Dialogue several times referenced how unique our request for proposals was. They called it refreshingly bold and comprehensive, it stated at one point, and also very innovative. Could you explain how so our RFP would be different from other community RFPs?
I think there's two pieces that are critical there. One, as you had mentioned about our senior planner and their past experience, I think there's a lot of lessons learned from Colwood's OCP that we, as a district, benefited from that experience, as well. Staff input into the RFP process and just developing and recognizing the situation today with the pandemic and what our expectations were. I think also there is the piece regarding just the sheer development of what Sooke is experiencing, and recognizing that there are very critical pieces in terms of climate action, the environment, the rural aspect of Sooke, but also the core development of a town center area. So Dialogue recognized what we were looking for and responded in kind with a proposal that met all of that RFP criteria.
You, which references did you check with in person? I mean, Dialogue has worked in Courtenay, working currently in Courtenay, Ladysmith, Tofino, North Saanich, Powell River, White Rock, Abbotsford. Did you reach out and check with the mayors or councillors or staff in those communities?
In terms of the selected projects that they had provided, we did not complete any reference checks. However, the planning world is very small, so you know, we have heard from time to time regarding any municipalities' projects, whether they like something or they don't like a project. But in terms of Dialogue, we had not heard any negative feedback on the projects that they had listed.
And I guess I can assume that our senior planner or yourself will be directly involved in all the bi-weekly phone meetings and check-ins with this project team?
That's correct. Our senior planner will take the lead on managing the project, but I will also be working very closely as part of this project, and will be benefited by myself and the senior planner having previous experience developing OCPs, as well as a consulting firm who has vast experience completing these types of projects. So we're well positioned moving forward to have a well experienced team, both on the district side as well as the consulting side.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll now turn to Councillor St. Pierre, please.
All right. Given that Sooke Council has already taken a few very strong steps towards climate action, including, you know, a strategic plan that really focuses immensely on that particular area, the formation of a climate action committee, how is Dialogue positioned to help us in terms of not just moving our carbon emissions down, but also helping us with redeveloping our local economy? I think that's one of my main concerns.
Mm-hmm. I think based on their the project team that they've selected and their sub-consultants, I can see between Sustainable Solutions Group and Colors International, those two sub-consultants will likely work very close together. One, Sustainable Solutions Group looking at the climate piece and having previous experience in North Saanich, North Cowichan, Capital Regional District, as well as other major areas like Toronto, Edmonton, that they would look at those pieces, and then working with Colors International and the land economics piece, developing policies that would also reflect what would be mindful of proper climate action change policies in place. So it's really the whole team that they're putting together, working together. So not one piece is just going to develop and stand out. They're going to each, as sub-consultants, develop in their respective fields and then make sure that it all works together in the end. And that's what we liked about their proposal, is that each group recognized their specific expertise area, but how it will also fit into the much larger picture, which Dialogue will manage overall.
I had one more question along those lines. I'm curious about the risk assessment piece that I think has been discussed previously in Council, and whether or not, see again, the OCP is a product of the community and the engagement of the community, so I don't know how that would actually all fit together. But obviously a plan that goes into the future and is likely to be dealing with a number of different unexpected events. What sort of risk assessment capacity do they have in terms of helping us in that area?
They, just in terms of their past experience, and I mean, they're going to be looking at our municipality and the size, and then from their past experiences, also looking at similar risks that have been experienced in medium to large size municipalities, and then kind of presenting a whole scale approach to it and saying, here's what the anticipated outcome can be in the future, and here's what we can do to minimize those based on certain growth projection areas. So, if you reach a certain population at this point, here's what most municipalities will experience, and at that time we can plan for those types of events, and so on and so forth. So there'll be different horizons that will be presented, and then policies that will then suit how you can address those. And some situations may arise and some may not, just based on geographics or the timeline and technology that's been developed. But what they'll do is they'll have a large presentation piece that will look at those different scenarios, and we'll have the opportunity to select what we feel as a community best meets our needs based on our geography and community interests.
So, if I understand correctly, we're basically counting heavily on the multidisciplinary aspect that they bring to the project, but also their experience with a number of different areas to basically predict those horizons and figure out what might be happening with our own growth and what we can expect.
Correct. And lastly, just tying that all together with the community input as well, because that's going to be the main resources. They're the experts in their field, but they will take a lot of that information that they hear back from the public to understand what has kind of been the historical piece that the public has recognized and placed importance on, to also build that into the process. So they recognize the importance of not just their knowledge of what's happened over time, but also what the community feels has been a large experience, and how that can also play into those horizons as well. Because we can look at specific numbers, but there's also the community piece that they're critically looking at as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Beddoes?
First of all, I'm just so pleased to hear that this is finally moving on. Sort of a long time waiting, but that just might be my own impatience. The only question I have, I trust that staff has done their homework in making this choice, and I'm very happy with leaving it in their hands to make that choice. They've obviously looked at a lot of different things. The only thing that I have is that we have a budget of $200,000, and dialogue is $199,915, but GST is added to that. Is that how it works? So we would exceed our $200,000 budget?
Through your worship, GSTs, we received that back from the federal government, so it doesn't get included.
I thought that was the case, but I just wanted to make that clarification, because somebody on the outside reading this document may not realize it. So we're within our $200,000. Thank you very much. I'm surprised they're all sitting over there, 199, 199, 199. It's like they knew what our budget was, eh? Anyways, of course they knew what our budget was.
Councillor Lajeunesse?
Yeah, I read through the entire proposal, and having been involved in the last OCP review, I was impressed. Thought it was very comprehensive, the proposal, and I have no problem with it. I would have liked to see the others and compare them a little bit, but I'm confident that these guys will do a good job for us.
Great. So that I have nothing further on this. So we have a recommendation, Councillor Bateman.
Yeah, I had a further question. Now, one of the comments in the dialogue study or report says, while it's a strength that we have such a comprehensive list of sub-plans underway that must be integrated into our OCP, this strength is also a challenge, as it adds a layer of complexity to project management and timeline coordination. I was thinking perhaps there would be an awful lot of overlap, given that a lot of key pieces of the OCP are being prepared ahead of time outside the need of our consultant in this case. But I suppose that putting those puzzle pieces together is the key piece here. Now, that's not a question, but if you'd like to comment.
I think part of our discussions with dialogue would be any possible refinements that we could make to the schedule, And that would be one of the pieces, just recognizing some of the projects that we have ongoing right now, like the transportation piece, and looking at ways that we could modify and augment what they currently propose to help speed up the process. Because you're exactly right, we do have a lot of plans that have currently been completed, and that's going to be the critical piece, working with our senior planner to help kind of guide that process early on to help dialogue, understand where to find and disseminate our current work and develop it with their consulting team and kind of put their take on the OCP based on community feedback as well. So we're going to work closely with them to make sure that nothing is left out, but at the same time not create a lot of duplication.
You're good, Councillor? Yeah. Okay. Mr. McInnes?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just would like to respond to Councillor Bateman's question as well. The document review process is going to be significant with this project, and making sure that there's not contradicting stuff from different areas of the community or different reports that have been developed really is going to be key. And it goes back to, I think, the council discussion that we had on April 14th when the RFP was on the agenda around, do we want to keep our OCP fairly focused, or do we want to have it quite diverse? And the direction that I got from council at that meeting is, my understanding is we want to keep it fairly streamlined. We talked a lot about what has to be in an OCP and what is discretional in an OCP, and I left that meeting with the understanding that we want it to be fairly focused on the things that are a requirement in the OCP. So that piece is, and we have a lot of very informed reports right now, and just making sure that our OCP aligns with those things will be a piece of work in itself.
Thank you for raising that, Mr. McInnes, because that was a challenge that certainly I became aware of in the time that I've been here, and it's where an application of some sort would come forward, and in one case it's referencing, say, the district's transportation master plan, and then the OCP has a different set of, I think it had to do with road description or road width of some sort. So which one is right here, and why do they say something different? Whereas having the OCP refer to the transportation master plan allows that plan to be updated and refined without amending the OCP over and over. And I think because the OCP that we have now tried to be something for everyone, it's what led it to being amended many times, even within a year of its being adopted. And then you have now you have all these plans, and we invested heavily into these set of plans. And it's unfortunate then that you run into these contradictions. And then which one prevails? Well, I would think it's the OCP, but then the zoning bylaw came around, and then that came in with something entirely different. So I really like this approach here because it would allow the OCP to remain in, this is bigger than all of council. This is a vision for now and to guide us into the future, but it will allow council to put in policy that then will maybe be more relevant to a particular time on hand, so that we don't have to keep then reopening the OCP and changing it, because in some cases I think some really good ideas got thrown out at times when an OCP change happened. I'll use drive-throughs, for example. Early on edition of the OCP was no drive-throughs in the town center, and then the language changed to discourage because of other things that happened. And then the community was then asking, why did we approve this? Well, that isn't what it says now. And that's where I think you need to have the OCP. I'm glad you raised that. This is what it needs to have, but it allows for council to have flexibility and to come up with policy statements, which would be a lot quicker than amending. Now we have to restart the whole OCP, because it was almost when the last one got adopted, it was timely to start the next one. And certainly we've seen attempts at rebooting the OCP over time, and now we're finally here, so it's good. Councillor Beddoes, thank you.
Oh, I just, yay. I mean, I'm really ecstatic that we're getting on with this process. It's been a real stumbling block not having it in. And I'm looking forward to a transportation master plan in the near future, which all molds into building the community that we all said that we wanted to be part of. So I'm pretty happy with the way things are going. So thanks to the staff for getting on with it.
Thank you, Councillor. And just to your point, Councillor Bateman, that you raised about all the different plans and how, and Mr. Paolo answered it, just with all the different plans kicking off. I mean, that was a concern that I remember our planning staff raising a few years ago when the transportation master plan work started first. And why wouldn't you do an OCP first and have that answer? And I remember they raised that, well, this could become a complexity down the road if you do one ahead of the other. But that was the recommendation from a committee that we had, and it was the will of council at the time. So certainly we're seeing that now bubble up, but that's fine. Councillor St. Pierre?
I just wanted to mention along the same lines that I did note that the OCP, I think in section 5.3, recommended having an agricultural plan, which we have, and there was a great deal of duplication between the two documents. And I can totally see how we needed to amend and review and update the agricultural plan. But one of my concerns is simply in terms of implementation, because both documents more or less say the same thing, but we haven't actually had a great deal of implementation. I'm just curious about in a general sort of way, how we're going to see the implementation roll out of the OCP and how we're going to put the teeth into it. Because I think that's one of the things that we've also lacked a focus, obviously an OCP that isn't all over the place and trying to do too much, but also moving forward on the recommendations. So I'm just hoping to get some clarity on that a little bit.
Mr. McInnes?
So I think the process that we have now for strategic priorities, the 3 goals, the 18 objectives that we have in the current council strategic plan, I think we're fairly focused on working that plan, and we can't be all things for all people. There is a capacity issue, and I think we've got the capacity issue with the current plan fairly dialed in. But the trick is to get those things into the priorities that council wants to spend resources on. An OCP will have a lifespan of 20 to 50 years, and it may take that long to get to all of the items. But the process that we have employed here is a 4-year strategic plan based on the election cycle, and it'll be each council's responsibility to develop their plans early on in their term.
Thank you, Mr. McInnes. Okay, so seeing no more queries here, we do have a recommendation, and that is that council authorize the mayor and the chief administrative officer to enter into a contract with Dialogue Services to undertake the review and update of the Sooke official community plan. Moved by Councillor Bateman and seconded by Councillor Beddoes. Is there any discussion or any questions on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question then. All those in favor? Is anyone opposed? No one's opposed. That's carried unanimously. Great. Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Powell. This is exciting. So also exciting is item 7.2. which is our draft official community plan advisory committee and the terms of reference. So maybe I'll turn this over to staff again, please.
Thank you. This report is seeking council's approval for the terms of reference for the advisory committee for the OCP, as well as direction to begin advertising for membership on the advisory committee once the terms of reference have been approved by council. What we are establishing in the terms of reference, which are attached to this report, is a select committee and one of a size that is manageable. What we've been researching as we were putting together the advisory committee is looking at multiple sizes and configurations from different topic areas and trying to ensure that we can capture key areas while at the same time not having a large group. And so our efforts were to try and keep the group membership under 10, just in terms of being a manageable group. We've seen some that were upwards of 15 members, and read some of the reports and had feedback from staff at those offices, and there were certain challenges. So we wanted to make sure that this was going to be an advisory committee that could be successful, provide the technical piece that we're looking for, that would give the feedback to council that could ultimately make a good decision. So the 7 areas that we would be seeking for membership would be 1, building an economic development community; 2, health and social services; 3, environmental stewardship; 4, business and tourism community; 5, arts, culture and recreation; 6, youth or young adult under 29; and 7, First Nations culture and heritage resources. And so this committee, as I mentioned, would provide that technical input to council, and would be working very closely as well with Dialogue to provide key feedback pieces along the milestone timelines that the consultant has selected. We anticipate roughly 6 meetings, but that will all be dependent on the frequency and need based on engagement sessions and dialogue as well. But that's roughly what we're looking for in terms of the committee makeup. And of course, our intent would be to post for approximately a month, so that by August we could work with Dialogue to share with them the makeup of the advisory committee. They could begin communication and then start doing scheduling based on what their project schedule is looking for. Of course, making sure that we can schedule these with everyone who sits on the advisory committee based on their own personal schedules to participate. We've ensured as well that there is compliance through the structure of the terms of reference with the committee structure and function policy, as well as the code of ethics that we would also want every member to sign as well. Just as additional information from tonight with the supplemental public input piece, I'll just address that right now as well for council's consideration. If we're looking to have council amend the terms of reference to include an additional member from the Climate Action Change Committee, that would bring the number to 8 advisory committee members, at which point we would suggest that we would change a few things in the terms of reference. One just being that the council appointed member would then be a voting member, so at that point we would then have another odd number, so 9 at that point. So right now the terms of reference is structured that there would be 8 members, one of them being a council member but a non-voting member, so we could have an odd voting number at 7. So if we add the Climate Action Change Committee member, that would bring us to 8 voting members, and we would suggest that the council member be a voting member as well, to have 9 members voting. So we'd make that change, as well as just update the number of quorum to 1 additional member, which I believe at that point would be 5 members. So just for consideration, if that change were to be made, we'd also make those additional changes in the terms of reference. So with that, I'll conclude this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Paolo. I think what I saw from the Climate Action Committee members was more that we include an 8-person that is specific to climate change mitigation and adaptation. So I would be supportive of that, but not necessarily saying a member of the Climate Action Committee specifically. I just would leave it at that. And then should someone who has that background be on the committee, then that's fine. But it just would allow, I'm just trying to encourage greater participation from the committee is all. So I would be fine with that, because there may be other people who were unable to join the Climate Action Committee, but now may be available to join this committee. So they may not have initially applied to be on that committee. I don't know. I'm just throwing this out there as just a discussion point, and I would agree in terms of making the council in this, if we were to do that, to go with Mr. Paolo's suggestion of the councillor being voting, so that we don't run into tie votes and defeated action, really, is what would happen. So that's good advice there. So some hands are up. I'll start with Councillor St. Pierre, then go to Councillor Beddoes.
I think that Mayor Tate is absolutely right. The letter itself doesn't really want for a Climate Action Committee member. We're really looking for someone with the expertise to provide input on climate change adaptation mitigation and essentially provide further expertise. Environmental stewardship, although obviously strongly related, doesn't necessarily cover. And so looking for that additional input.
Councillor Beddoes?
Yeah, two things. One is I think the environmental stewardship does cover it. I would not be in favor of, I don't mind somebody from the Climate Action Committee applying for it, but I don't think we should increase it to another and then another to make it 9. I think I'm quite happy with the 7. Start getting very unruly, and I understand Councillor St. Pierre's passion in regards to climate change, but I think the environmental stewardship is exactly what it's about today, is the climate. So I'm quite happy with that. So if there's somebody from the Climate Action Committee, or even somebody better, I like the people that are on the committee are certainly good, upstanding citizens, but I'm not in favor of a councillor having a vote as well. I think that we should stand back from that, and we go one more and then have a councillor voting. I'm not in favor of that at all. We, as a council, work as a unit and not an individual. So I must say I'm not in favor of either one of those. So I'd like to keep it like it is. I think staff's done a good job at those categories, and environmental stewardship is close enough for me.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lajeunesse, then Bateman.
Yeah, I would agree with Councillor Beddoes on that, and I'm reading through the proposal from Dialogue. There were many references to addressing climate change in the proposal, so I think the consultant is going to have a lot of input on climate change mitigation as well.
Councillor Bateman.
Okay, so I was Googling, as I tend to do over the weekend, trying to find OCP Advisory Committee best practices. So I went to the FCM and to the UBCM websites, couldn't find anything. So given that there are 3,600 local governments in Canada, each one of them required to have an OCP, I'm wondering where you, where did you assemble this terms of reference and the best practices for the assembly of this committee? Ask the CAO, since he perhaps is well
we'll direct it to staff and he'll decide who will answer.
So I just want to challenge you on the requirement for every community to have an OCP. Not the case. But Mr. Paolo, do you want to address the question?
Thank you, yes. So just first off, just past experience with staff and our involvement in developing previous OCPs, we've had various experience developing terms of references for multiple projects, and specifically related to an OCP, we looked at specific key topic areas. And so these 7 that I had outlined in terms of reference were areas that we felt with which we could gather enough information from people with this amount of experience in these key areas that they would provide valuable input along with the expertise of a consultant helping guide and develop this project. And lastly, as I mentioned early on, about a group that is manageable, not having too many people as part of an advisory committee where we would not be able to accomplish the goal, which is ultimately getting that technical piece to help assist with council decisions at the end of the day. So a lot of this is based on past staff experience, as well as what we currently have in our OCP, but also what we would like to develop based on our RFP that we sent out and the key information pieces that we would like to have addressed. So staff felt that this covered those bases in this terms of reference.
All right, thank you. Now, this number 7 for the public appointees, that worries me a little in that we'll be putting out the call for participation amongst citizens, and that 7 kind of hamstrings us in that we potentially might receive a wealth of good applications. I noted in Courtenay, where Dialogue is also doing work at the moment, they originally identified 12 seats on their OCP advisory committee. They got 29 applicants, and they bumped up the number to 13, likely because of voting requirements. I wonder whether we could leave it a little more open in terms of if we do get a wealth of great applications, how do we fit these people in?
That's always the challenge at the end of the day, is council has to make that difficult decision. So I have a question, but I wanted just to wait till you were completed. I think it's the case where sometimes deadlines have been extended, we haven't received any applications, and then we need to extend it until we receive the number. And then of course, if we receive many, then we have to just work through that selection process. So I think it's hard to say. Like, I think we need to try, we need to get going, obviously, with something, and then make that determination. It's a bit early because we don't know what's going to come in.
Well, I would suggest that in advisory groups, the numbers 9 and 12 are often used. The round table, 12 Knights of the Round Table. 9 is a number that is often used as a functional, workable number. So I would like to see us expand the potential numbers from a minimum of 7 to a maximum of 9.
Yep, go ahead, Councillor Beddoes.
What categories would these extra 2 people
Well, we're just beginning the conversation because to me, there are a few, looking around at other OCP advisory committees, for example, View Royal has an interesting approach. They are appointing people from their various committees. They have a fuller range of committees than we do. Parks, Recreation, and Environment Advisory Committee has a seat on their OCP Advisory Committee, Planning and Development Advisory Committee, and so on. They also have their categories for public engagement. They want to be geographically representative of the community at large, if they can. This is what they're endeavoring to do. They also have a slot for a longtime resident and or a senior. We don't have such an individual on our list, I don't think. I don't know. Major employer, a small business representative, a developer realtor, working younger family, and or other interested individuals as identified by council. So of all those, I would think that longtime resident senior might be someone we'd want to provide a voice for on this committee, in addition to youth and First Nations. To be clear, this is a draft that we have the option to approve as it is tonight, or we can tinker and have it come back to us 2 weeks from now and evolve it a little bit. I would like to see us think a little further. Perhaps environmental stewardship could indeed be changed to climate change adaptation mitigation as a category among our 7. And to give it a little further thought in terms of how we might more fully, etc. I've had it.
So I'm going to push back a little. When I hear 9, I think it just comes from the Fellowship of the Ring. It's more just it comes from Tolkien, obviously, for reasons. If it was the case where we needed larger numbers, then one could argue that we need a bigger council, right? Our council is 7, and that provides diversity across the board. So if you start, when you need more and more, it can create an unwieldy group. If there's the case where we run into a situation where the committee is unable to meet in person and it's a Zoom meeting, then that's fine, but it can be a long and challenging Zoom meeting in that way when you have more and more people who have ideas that they wish to share. So that just could become a challenge. For me, I just, when I hear replacing, like when I hear environmental stewardship, we also have areas of significance in our community, riparian area, parks and trails, parkland, sensitive ecosystem and the like, is completely different than climate change and adaptation. There's just unique areas of our community. So someone might know of this particular species or birds or where the cormorants are, and that has nothing, it may be different. So I don't, and that's where I'm like, no, let's not take that out, because these natural green spaces are very prized and important to our community. So that's just why I might have just had that reaction a bit. But I do think that in the essence of moving, like I'm like I just think of a smaller group to get going, because they will be doing a lot of extensive public outreach. This doesn't mean that other members of the community do not have input in this. They will, and through all the various forums that we heard our staff or we see in the RFP, and certainly we would be expecting that on the consultant, which is why we awarded them in that way, so that there may be others that do have that do want to chime in, that are not on the committee, but that will certainly be you know, we'll be now I can't talk. We will be looking for their feedback and their involvement into this process. They just might not be on the steering committee that's moving this process along. So that's my comment. So I'll go to, we're doing a second round now. So Councillor Beddoes and then Councillor St. Pierre.
Yeah, I kind of agree with the mayor's assessment here. I think we keep it simple and the first go, and we get on with it. And again, the public does get input. It's those people that you mentioned, and I appreciate you bringing that up. It's thought-provoking. But I think the public is going to get their 2 bits worth, and this is a steering committee. When it comes to the seniors, it's almost like reverse discrimination to me, because I'm a senior and I'm not here to represent the seniors in Sooke. I'm here to represent everybody in Sooke. So I look at it from a big picture. I might have some experiences that go back a long time. So I'm not in favor of a senior on there just because he's a senior. So I'd like to keep it at 7. I think Councillor St. Pierre had some valid things too, but again, I think we can work around with environment stewardship, and we'll see who applies. Maybe one of those people from his steering committee. And I get a little worried about steering committees, or his climate action committee. Is we want people that represent not just one point of view. They have some expertise, but they're there for the whole plan. And I don't like it when we get somebody that from a select little group. They're not there to advocate for that little group. They're there to do a community plan for all of us. So one, in fact, may make it, but I'm very much determined that it stays at 7, and we stay with what staff has produced for us, and we see who we get. There's nothing stopping us in the future to modifying it if we want. Is that correct? So let's see what we get with the applications. The decision is ours, and I'm a firm believer that the buck stops with us, and we'll make that decision. So let's get on with it. Let's get this going. It's taken too long to get to this stage, but we're here, and I'm happy.
Councillor St. Pierre. Thank you, Councillor Beddoes.
I'd like to say that I agree with both our mayor and Councillor Beddoes. I also agree with Councillor Bateman that I don't think it's the end of the world if we actually increase the numbers, but I do think it makes the group less wieldy and less nimble, and I do think we need to get on with it, as Councillor Beddoes has pointed out. I do, however, think that Mayor Tate is absolutely right. Climate adaptation mitigation and environmental stewardship are really very different things. Figuring out how to make sure that we won't have a wildfire go through our town is not the same thing as protecting endangered species. Trying to make sure that our local economy is resilient and sustainable is not the same thing as protecting our waterfront. Environmental stewardship is incredibly important, and we need to be doing it, and often the two go together, but they're not the same thing at all. And given that we're looking at an IPCC report that indicates that we have about 10 years to do a lot of work, basically prepare ourselves for a lot of changes and to sequester as much carbon as we can, I don't think we can leave out the adaptation mitigation piece one way or another, not safely, not and do a service to our community or to anyone. Having said that, our strategic plan actually points out that we should be using a green lens on everything, so we have other options. We could simply be looking for various representatives from all 7 different groups that might have appropriate expertise. And I think that's a key word here. The advisory committee is supposed to provide expertise, not just an opinion, not just input from the community from a layperson, but ideally expertise. So what we're looking for here, ideally, is expertise in adaptation mitigation if we can find someone like that. That's going to be very important to us. And that's going to help inform the whole process. So I think that, although I agree with a lot of what's been said, I do think that we need to find some way to make sure that, given that we've declared a crisis, given that it's in our strategic plan, we need to do something with this. We need to show that we're going to walk the walk and talk the talk.
Thank you. Mr. McInnes.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to bring Council's attention to the April 14th report once again, where we reference Section 471 of the Local Government Act that suggested that an OCP should be policies to guide decisions on planning and land use management. And then there was a summary of the 4 things that are required in an OCP. And number 3 on that was greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. So that's the thing that we were looking at as far as the climate change mitigation and adaptation. May not be specifically in the terms of reference, but it certainly is a requirement for an OCP if council decides that they do want an OCP. And I totally agree with the comments around the environmental stewardship in sensitive areas as being an equally important priority in the OCP. But the greenhouse gas emissions, it is something that we don't have any discretion on and does have to be part of the OCP.
But just, yes, thank you, Mr. McInnes. So to Councillor St. Pierre, well, to all of us actually, my comment is that at the end of the day, it's up to council to adopt the OCP. And so if we're finding along the way that there is not enough work in terms of adaptation, like we would be, at the end, it's not the advisory committee that says, here's the OCP council. We're going to have involvement in this way that we can say, look, like you're not doing anything, or it's not enough, or if you met the minimum of what is required and it's not enough. So example, transit, we know we have excellent mode share, but it's not enough. The service isn't enough. So we will have that, as I see it, the ability to then frame that. Or if it comes to us, we would send the draft back for more work because it's fallen short in certain areas. I wouldn't want to say that they would have to start all over, but we do have we will be appointing a counselor to be a liaison to this committee so we can check out along the way. Their public meetings will receive the minutes and updates through this process. And at the end, if a draft document is provided that we feel that as a whole falls short, then we wouldn't be adopting it. We would be getting more work done on it. Back to Councillor St. Pierre, and then we need to move on. Go ahead.
I certainly agree that, as I think Councillor Beddoes has pointed out, the buck stops here and council gets to make the final determination as to whether the document is something we can agree with and live with. But at the same time, I do think that all of us are essentially lay people in a lot of ways. We don't necessarily have the background or the expertise, and I think that's what we're looking for. I think ideally we want a document that's informed by the best that our community has to offer in terms of expertise. So I think we should be actually asking specifically for what we want and what we need, whether it be environmental stewardship / climate adaptation mitigation. I don't care. I just think that we need to include that language because none of this actually reflects that, and it's what our future requires. And anything that doesn't include that is not going to be sufficient. So we're just going to have to go back to the drawing board or wrangle over whether or not we want to accept it or not. I think we just need to make sure that the appropriate expertise is available if it's possible.
No, and fair enough, but I certainly hope that for $200,000 that the consultant will be recognizing the here and now, the state of not just Sooke, but the state of what is happening in the world, and deliver on that, you know. So if we don't see that, I'll be like, I don't want to sign these checks. Like, given that, you know, you roll back pre-COVID, there was extreme blockades, we had Greta, like all of that, and our youth mobilizing everywhere, leaving school, and like none of that is forgotten. And if this consultant doesn't get that, yeah, I wouldn't be even wanting to pay. So like for me, it feels like it's covered throughout this, and that, you know, and this is where I think we're just sort of differing now, and it's getting into the weeds a bit for me, because I think overreaching, like if you have not read our strategic plan or all the other pieces here, then I feel it comes back to the consultant not delivering. But we've all agreed and we're content with where we're at with the consultant, so I feel it's fine. Anyway, I see Councillor Beddoes. Go ahead, Councillor Beddoes.
I'd like to make a motion that Council approve the terms of reference of the Fisher Community Plan Advisory Committee, and that Council direct staff to proceed with advertising for membership in the Fisher Community Plan Advisory Committee and report back to Council with applications for membership selection. That's my motion. Okay, so that's been moved. Is there a seconder? Councillor Lajeunesse is seconding the motion. A question I have for staff then, and so this goes back to the question on the membership here where we're advertising. Just in terms of the form, like there may be queries from the public in terms of, well, what do you mean about arts, culture, and recreation, for example? Will we see more fleshed out information there? Because even with the one on, and then even picking on environmental stewardship, we had a different interpretation of what that meant. Some feel that, like my interpretation is different than Councillor Beddoes, and so most certainly out in the public, there may be that difference. So when we encourage, probably on the application, will it have like a box that someone will select, like they're applying under item 1 and they would list off where those credentials, or some may have experience in more than one category. So would they tick off more and then we would decide, or how will that process work and what will it look like?
I would agree that, or I would suggest that yes, the applicant would have to tick off one of the 7 boxes and provide their resume or their experience in that. But Matthew and I have not talked through that. Have you talked with the team about that, Mr. Powell?
What we would have, for simplicity, are those 7 boxes that they could tick off, and then further they would define how they have experience in those selected areas, so they could further elaborate when we go through the review process to understand where their background is, and then have that, you know, a resume that's attached explaining, you know, that they have education or prior work experience or committee involvement, whatever the case might be. But it wouldn't just be a simple checking of a box and we take it at that. There needs to be some explanation from the applicant as well as how they demonstrate expertise in that specific area or areas.
And then will the application process then further explain these categories in greater detail?
We can certainly put a little bit of an explanation as to each of those 7 areas and what certain fields of expertise might include, such as, you know, we talked about shoreline stabilization, and you know, if we're talking about health and social services, we can further elaborate and give a little bit more of a description on each of those 7 areas.
Okay, and then further, I know that our website, you know, at some point we're looking at redeveloping it, but like with COVID-19, we have a specific page that lists off and all the information is in one place. Are we able to do something similar for the OCP now, where we can put sort of the timeline of events and then have all the relevant material on one page? That might be helpful just to have a place where it can launch from.
So initially, before we went through the proposal process, staff's intent for the OCP was to have its own dedicated OCP page. Now, going through the proposals and seeing what is available through Dialogue, we may rely heavily on what their internet social media presence will include. one of them being a dedicated website area as well. So whether it's a link on our page that would go directly to a more graphic developed page that they have, or something of that nature, we'll work through Dialogue, but there will certainly be a dedicated portal for the OCP specifically with timelines, feedback opportunities, things of that nature. Okay, no, that's good. Okay, that's good. Okay, we have a motion, Councillor St. Pierre.
I'd like to see if it's possible to amend the motion. Almost every one of the items here has building and economic development, health and social services, First Nations culture and heritage resources. Could we possibly put environmental stewardship and climate change? It wouldn't change any of the intent, but it would actually allow people with that specific information to come forward. I don't feel comfortable otherwise, but I would certainly accept that.
Okay, so the amendment that you're testing is that is to add "and climate change" after environmental stewardship and climate change, and or just and climate change. Okay, so that's an amendment moved by Councillor St. Pierre. Is there a seconder? That's seconded by Councillor Bateman. So on the amendment, anything to add further? Councillor St. Pierre is the mover of the amendment.
I think that the amendment basically covers all our bases, doesn't cost us anything at all. It's not even a cost of a letter, and would actually allow us to potentially tap into some people in the community that might have the information we need.
Okay, thank you. Anything, Councillor Bateman, as a seconder? With the microphone on?
I have comments on all sorts of other things, but not on this motion.
I'm asking about the amendment.
Yeah, exactly.
On the amendment, Councillor Beddoes?
I'm okay with the amendment.
Okay, so I'll call the question on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment? Okay, anyone opposed? No one's opposed. That's carried unanimously. So now on the main motion as amended, please. Is there any further discussion on the amended main motion? See none. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried unanimously. Okay, so just for staff, once this is ready, I would like a media release done, just to highlight that we have engaged. You could list off the consultant, and then a little bit about the process, and then, you know, we're reaching out for members. So if we could have that drafted, you know, when you're sort of ready for that intake, because that would be a good way to just highlight this particular moment, but also then here's what we're doing, and a call to action and a call for help from the community.
Done.
Okay. So you don't need a motion for that?
No. Can I make one other comment? And
Yeah.
I passed up the opportunity to respond to Councillor Bateman when he raised it, but the question about the novel and refreshing spirit of our RFP, I really think that part of that is what we identified in the RFP between the balance between the technical expertise of the consulting team and the local learned knowledge here. And I really appreciate the debate that Council had tonight, because we are committed to that, to finding the right balance between those two things. And getting the right people on this advisory board is going to be our first big challenge, and we're looking forward to it.
Thank you, Mr. McInnes. So at this point, in terms of the councillor liaison, we don't need to make that appointment tonight. That can come at an upcoming meeting? Okay. We'll get the selection of the public resolve, I think, will be the next big piece. So that's just something for members of council to think about as you sort of look ahead at your folios and your workload and the like.
Through your worship, when those applications do go to council, that would probably be a timely point to make the council appointment.
Very good. That makes sense. Okay, thank you. Okay, that's great. Thank you, Mr. Palau. Next up is item 7.3. So this is the Sooke program of the Arts Committee. So at a previous meeting, we had requested that we bring this back so that everyone here at this council can actually look at the terms of reference. And I see that there is a, I'll turn it over to staff, but there is a draft, a revised terms of reference.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. As you mentioned, at the May 25th meeting, Council asked for the terms of reference to come back as they would like the SPA committee resurrected to reconsider options for the memorial sculpture at Whiffin Spit. In doing so, a list of the projects that were underway in mid-2019 when it sort of dissolved a bit has been provided for in the report. The proposed changes to the terms of reference include an updated format, as well as a mandate to liaise with arts and cultural events in the community as directed by Council previously. For example, members of the SPA committee were involved in the district's 20th anniversary event in John Phillips Memorial Park and provided much needed volunteer support and manpower. An additional change includes an update to membership guidelines. Representation from the Parks and Trails Advisory Committee has been removed as the committee has been dissolved. Representation from specific community groups remain, but staff suggests that Council reconsider which, if any, community organizations be represented. Committee member recruitment from specific organizations can be challenging. Third-party organizational membership and mandates may change, and there may be a perceived advantage to community groups whose interests are represented. Otherwise, it's for your consideration. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Machada. I have a couple of questions. So one of them, like under the membership, one to put forward is one representative from the Sooke Nation. So whether that is elected member of council or someone that they appoint, that would be something that I would like to see there. And my second question is, in terms of with the terms of reference or the mandate, like I have just a note here of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 potential projects that are somewhat started or slightly underway already. So how do we ensure that we see, now if the committee decides, you know what, we just don't want to pursue this, and they make that recommendation to council, then I'm totally fine with that, but I just feel that there's just a number of things, loose ends dangling out in the community that need closure. So for example, Town Center, Highway 14 painted crosswalks, Town Center kiosk display communication board, Telus building mural. The mural that was formerly outside Mom's Cafe is currently in district storage. The ozone felted fish that was done for the Olympics ended up at the Harbor House is also currently in storage. We have the memorial sculpture, of course, and then there's new town center bear-proof garbage cans, which would be great for like a wrap project, like the utility boxes. So those were some things that I would like to see the committee work on, but they're not necessarily in the mandate. So just how can we ensure that that happens? Now, if the committee comes forward and they say they give a recommendation no to one of these, I'm okay with that, but I just think it needs to go through that process and go through a committee, come to us, and then either we go ahead with it or we file it. But I just don't want to see these projects and then like another 5 or 10 new projects, and then we have all these projects out there that are all in various states of not being completed.
Yeah. I noticed that you mentioned some that are not included in the report from the information Ms. Temple gathered. So I think that we could certainly look at that and put all of those ones together. Council can decide which ones are a priority. But I think they all still fall under the committee, like the public art function of the committee. And again, council can make their recommendations of their priorities and refer those issues to the committee for their consideration.
Okay, so that way they'll all get captured. Okay, good. Okay, so over to council, you see the terms of reference, and then just, so we're looking at anything further on the mandate, and then of course staff would like us to fill in a bit more about the membership here. And I've put forward one suggestion, and that is the Sooke Nation, but looking for others for your thoughts on this. We have the Arts Council, one rep from the Sooke Region Historical Society, one member of council, and then we could just have members at large. Councillor St. Pierre?
Just a quick comment on representation by the Sooke. They're always strained for people, and I think that if we require representation from the Sooke, we may have issues just filling that spot. I think it's good to extend the invitation, as always, But I think that in that particular case, and probably in all cases, if we absolutely require representation from a particular organization, we're hamstringing our selection process. So I'm hoping we can avoid that.
Oh, fair enough. Councillor St. Pierre? Or, pardon me, Councillor Bateman?
Yeah. I'm the one without the hair. Yeah, that's the giveaway. Okay. Nor the hyphen. So when I first started thinking about this, before I did note that staff recommendation that perhaps individuals tied to specific organizations, it was not a good idea. I was thinking, in addition to the Sooke Arts Council, Sooke Historical Society, representatives from other societies, registered societies, Sooke Fine Arts Society, Sooke Garden Club, Sooke Community Choir, Sooke Philharmonic, Sooke Harbor Players. And I did raise this idea back in the midst of time about the OCP committee, that it might have been possible to go to our leading community groups, ask them to put forward a name. It's suggested here that that does cause confusion and potential signs of bias, but it strikes me that creating seats for our established long-term societies involved in the arts would be a way forward. So, yeah, and in terms of what the previous SPA committee, you know, there are minutes from all those reports. I looked for them online. They're not there anymore, but that I could find. But I did print out a few, and that committee, it seemed, had honed in on those city center crosswalks as a priority. In fact, in their minutes of June 14th, 2018, they had contacted staff on this subject. Artwork had been created for the crosswalks, and staff had met with the Ministry of Transportation, which apparently took the artwork away. So that was one, and the other key thing in the memorial wall and the town center tourism kiosk. So I would hope that this council would require this new committee to seriously look at those three items in particular.
Okay, other thoughts from members of council? Okay, staff is still looking for us to just note what the membership would look like. So are you comfortable with it remaining as Sooke Arts Council, Sooke Region Historical Society, one councillor, and then to add in the rest, just five members of the community? I mean, we are looking, like for me, I'm looking for someone with a background in art to guide us through this, so that, because that's the intent of this committee. Councillor Beddoes?
Yeah, I like your suggestion, the five members from the community, and again, we get to vet them, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then we can see what connection they have to the arts. And so I'm okay with that, those three groups and five members?
There's Councillor St. Pierre, when I put forward South Nation, like there is a concern of the capacity that they have. So would we note that here, or?
Well, my suggestion is we offer it to the South Nation, and if they can't field somebody, we go for another person at large.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it beholds us to, I mean, especially with the native art, it's something very, very big in this part of the world.
Yeah.
I'm happy with that. But if they can't field anybody, we just go for one more person at large.
And it may not be one of their elected council.
Nope,
they may suggest so-and-so. There have been beautiful artwork done in our community and certainly on their buildings. So they may have someone that they might want to recommend to us. And then the others would be, so if that were the case, one representative appointed by the South Nation, I suppose, or referred by the South Nation, and then it would be five. But the intent when we frame this is to have someone either with an appreciation or skill in art.
Yeah. The five at large have to have, through your worship, five at large has to have some background in art. Absolutely.
Yeah, not just I like it, but I have a little more
Yeah.
You know, I sculpt, I build, whatever that may be. Ms. Machada?
Just building on what Councillor Beddoes mentioned on the previous terms of reference for the OCP committee, is if there are those 3 representatives, 5 members at large, the council member, the way the terms of reference are written, is a voting member. So not sure if you want to amend the terms of reference to remove that, but in so doing, we would again wind up with 8 members, but suggest that we could do 3 and then word it up to 6 members of the committee at large to not exceed a maximum of 7 or 9, whatever that number, magic number, I guess it would be 9 voting members.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I think 7, though, should be the maximum amount, so that there's a non-number there.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the other reason why I don't think it's wise to have a voting member from council, I mean, I don't know if it's a big conflict of interest, but it might be, because you're making a vote there and then bringing it here, and then you'd have to recuse yourself, and I don't think that's what we ever want to do if we don't have to. So I'd like to see, as I made my case, leave it off, and I like your suggestion. I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Mr. McInnes?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to your comments, there is some crossover as well with the public art policy, specifically 3.2 in that policy, where any public art project over $5,000, we are to put together a public art jury. So I think at that point we would certainly be looking for some expertise in the public art world to help adjudicate the awarding of those contracts.
Great. Yep, well, this is great. This is exciting. Councillor Bateman.
So I take it that my suggestion around these other organizations has got 0 traction around this table, right? No uptake at all? No comment or consideration?
Well, it's nice.
It's nice.
Well, I don't know.
That's about it. Okay, fine.
Well, it's a good idea.
I'll accept that, sure. Sure. So I'm just curious as to if indeed, what was this in the staff report?
Let me just respond a bit more.
Yeah.
It's just, how now do we decide? There's a lot of organizations, and so without having talked to any of them, you know, there's a few that you left off, and then there's many more. So now, like, you could end up with many, right? So that's why I didn't mean to diminish your comments by saying just that it was nice. It was more the case, okay, it's the first I heard of that, and how then do we choose one over the other? I'm a bit stuck there. Why the Fine Arts Show? I mean, there's good reason for that, but there's also the Children's Art Club, which is also very valid. And there's also programming out of EMCS. I mean, I would also think the community school be like, you can see how this conversation could get really big.
Well, I did
really
preface my comments by noting society status, and I did think I cited 5 of the most significant of groups. There are many others indeed, but these would be the 5 significant. So it's not a big deal here, but I'm just need to cite that. I guess the concern then would be with the Sooke Arts Council and Sooke Historical Society having standing members or seats on this committee, given that they too could be potentially a perceived advantage to a community group whose interests are represented. I think I'm just really perfectly happy with
They
how
can
this
most
is
certainly have that same thing, in which case we could just have up to 7 members from any organization and start it fresh in that way. Councillor Beddoes?
Yeah, the Councillor Bateman, I mean, seriously valid points, but I think that when we have 5 at large, any one of those other groups can put somebody up for one of those 5 at large. And again, the end result, it's us that makes that decision. And we can have a look, and if we don't feel that it is balanced, or somebody has an advantage over another group, then it's up to us to make that determination. Again, I'm all for simplicity. A big cumbersome group tends to get bogged down. This to me is a nice number. We've got a lot of very dedicated people in the community that could put their names forward. I'm pretty happy with it. I think some of those groups you mentioned are valid and they can apply, and I would certainly give them full consideration. I'm happy with it.
Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to find here. So first off, for recommendations here is to actually appoint the counselor. So Councillor Lajeunesse has expressed interest in being on this committee. That would be, and he doesn't have to be an artist because we're all lay people here.
Neither am I.
However, as our
I'm not an artist, but I'm a critic.
oh great, so it's just being that Councillor Lajeunesse is our newest counselor, and we're looking to assign him some duties, and he is already our liaison to the CRD Arts Commission. It just seems to be a natural fit. So, but of course, if anyone else...
I'll make that motion.
Okay.
Councillor Lajeunesse be our representative.
That council appoint Councillor Dana Lajeunesse to the Sooke Program of the Arts Committee. Moved by Councillor Beto, seconded by Councillor Bateman. Any discussion here? All right, all those in favor? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? None opposed. That's carried unanimous. Thank you, Councillor Lajeunesse. And then in terms of the proposed amendments, Ms. Mushadu, what do you require here, given our conversation here and the blanks that are on your draft terms of reference?
I think the second motion could be that Council adopt the proposed amendments to the Sooke Program of the Arts Committee terms of reference, including an amendment to membership to include one representative from the Sooke Arts Council, one representative from the Sooke Region Historical Society, and up to 5 members at large, not to exceed a maximum of 7 members, and to change the voting status of councillor to non-voting.
Okay, so, but I guess the third one would be the Sooke Nation. So if there were the 3, then we would have 4 members of large.
Yep.
Okay, and the councillor would be non-voting. Councillor Lajeunesse?
What about having some youth representation on there as well?
Well, we would encourage them to apply, so
Okay.
go through the networks, and I think that would, I think when we put this out, again, it would be another media release, and we are looking for a variety of members. So, okay, so there's a motion that Ms. Mushada has read out, which is basically that council adopt the proposed amendments to the SPA committee terms of reference, and including amendments for the committee membership and everything you said. The 3 organizations, 2 organizations plus Sooke Nation, up to 4 general or at-large positions. Right? Right.
And changing the voting status of the councillor.
And to change the voting status of the councillor to non-voting. Councillor Betters.
Yeah, just the thing is, if the Sooke Nation cannot field somebody for that committee, then we would not, the plan was that we'd up the ones at large. Wasn't that the original discussion?
Yeah, then we could.
But I don't think that's
So
what
that
you
would be,
said.
we would go up to 5,
Yes.
not to exceed 7
Okay,
members.
good.
Okay.
I understand. That's good.
Okay. Are we all clear on the motion? Okay, Councillor Bateman.
Yeah, one thing I didn't mention was that the back in 2018, there were 3 council resolutions that did in fact go forward, authorizing the kiosk, the crosswalks, and the memorial bench. So I'm wondering whether the memorial bench is underway, and that will be dealt with, but do those 3 items get placed in the terms of reference?
This is where, that was a question that I had early on, and I don't think they need to, from what I heard, they don't need to be in the terms of reference, but it would be when this committee first meets, here's their outstanding work, and then It would be like staff will take what's here, sort of council resolutions, put them together, and then the committee then can start to work through those things. But if they then recommend that we should abandon this or that, I want to hear that.
Through your worship. So yeah, the second bullet item under the mandate in the terms of reference is to identify and make recommendations to council on community artistic initiatives. So I think all three of those would fall under that. Mm-hmm. So again, we would just put in front of them, or put in front of council, everything that is outstanding, and council or the committee, however you like to do it, can prioritize those projects.
Yeah. Okay, so is staff has the resolution then? Clear? Okay. Could I have a councillor move the recommendation that Ms. Machado put together for us? Moved by Councillor St. Pierre, seconded by Councillor Beddoes. Any questions? No, there's, okay. My only, I'll put it in here as a comment, is just let's put together a media release for this, and then that could sort of trigger out, here's what we're doing, and get the word out to get some information or interest in the application process. Okay? All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Thank you very much, and good luck, Councillor Lajeunesse. And I think that...
We've got part 3 of the motion.
We do need part 3 to this, and that council directs staff to advertise for public members of the Sooke Program, the Arts Committee, members in accordance with Policy 1.4, Committee Structure and Function Policy, and the initial term of the appointment to be extended to December 31st, 2021. Moved by Councillor Bateman and seconded by Councillor Beddoes. Okay, and that'll cover the media release. Okay, all those in favor of the motion? Anyone opposed? And that's carried unanimously. Great, thank you very much. Okay, so next up is item 8. BYLAWS 8.1.
Excuse me, Your Worship.
Yes.
Item 7.4 from the supplementary.
Oh, okay. I had that under 9. Okay, so this is a South Island Prosperity Project and a voting delegate. So there is a very brief report here with a recommendation to designate myself, Mayor Maya Tate, to serve as the designate for the South Island Prosperity Partnership. Moved by Councillor Bateman and seconded by Councillor Lajeunesse. Any questions, comments? Seeing none, all those in question?
How often will you be meeting with SIP?
Not entirely sure as of yet. So there are some things that are starting to kick off, including this week on a Zoom meeting, and then I'm just trying to get an understanding of how the structure works.
Okay.
So I don't know.
Well, good luck.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'll let you know. May have to change it. No, I'm kidding. All right. Okay, that's on the floor. All those in favor of the recommendation? Opposed? And that's carried. Oh, Councillor St. Pierre, were you opposed? Okay, it's just, okay, perfect. Thank you. That's carried unanimously. Okay, thank you, everyone. Item 8 now, bylaw section is 8.1, the delegation of authority for liquor license amendment applications. And over to staff, please.
Thank you. This report is a follow-up from the previous council meeting from May 25th, and a motion that arose from that meeting that was approved, that council directs staff to expedite commercial building permit and liquor license applications to aid in the economic recovery from COVID-19. Staff have already received communication from one business requesting a favorable outcome with a liquor license amendment application based on a directive that the province has put out, Directive 20-13. And what that allows for is a temporary expansion of patio service areas up until October 31st of this year. So this is a means to allow for having additional patrons that otherwise wouldn't be able to locate inside an establishment or on a current patio area, that they could find other areas within their business operations area that they could accommodate these patrons on a temporary basis up until October 31st. So staff have reviewed current bylaws and are proposing an amendment to the Officers and Delegation of Authority bylaw that would delegate authority to staff for the purpose of providing comment on liquor license amendment applications that would otherwise require a resolution by council. So on January 23rd of 2017, the province brought into effect changes to the Liquor Control and Licensing Act that included the ability for a council to delegate authority to staff. Currently, that authority has not been delegated, so it resides with council to make decisions on these amendment applications. Through our review, we found, in conjunction with council's motion from May 25th, that one ability to expedite these building permit processes is to have this authority delegated to staff. That way, as requests come in, we could immediately respond with comment, and then the applicant could then proceed further with their application to the province for their temporary expansion. So on May 22nd, this policy directive was released by the Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch. And what we had in terms of communications with the branch were two options that were presented. One, that the district could provide a blanket-wide approval for the entire community. And what that would mean is that it would speed up the process in terms of applications being submitted to the province, and that we would find out afterwards if the applicant was successful with their amending application to the province. There would still be the requirement from the applicant to comply with all local government bylaws. The second option that was presented to staff was that we could approve all individual requests for liquor, primary, and manufacturer expansions prior to licensees submitting their applications to the branch. So this would be somewhat slower of a process, but it would allow us to at least have the ability to review these amending applications and provide comment. And essentially what the applicant and the province would be required to receive from the local government is just correspondence indicating that there was no concerns with the amendments to their application, and then the province would then further evaluate their application under the Act. So based on these two options, staff have determined that a delegation of council's authority would be the most appropriate at this time to help expedite the process. We're not suggesting a community-wide opt-out as proposed in option one, because there's still multiple factors that should be considered, which staff would take into consideration, such as public spaces and residential areas, location of the expansion, impact of noise surrounding expanded service areas. Council wished to further assist local businesses through the utilization of existing business operation areas, whether this be the loading space areas dedicated by the businesses, on-site parking stalls, or any other types of means, perhaps sidewalks, roads, or adjacent properties. Staff would request further direction to be provided by a resolution from council. The bylaw that is attached to this report, if it is not the desire of council tonight to approve the bylaw, staff would suggest that perhaps a delegation of this authority be provided via a resolution, and that it be for the purposes of all powers, duties, and functions of council be delegated to the Director of Planning and Development to consider liquor license amendment applications for the purpose of temporary expanded service areas until October 31st, 2020, in response to the Provincial Policy Directive number 20-13. So this would at least allow tonight two options. If the bylaw were to be passed, staff would immediately tomorrow begin working with that one business that I had mentioned that would be interested in expanding their temporary patio area. Or if the bylaw were not to be considered, but the resolution, this would still allow staff to work with that same business on their amending application. So two options that were presented. I'll just quickly go through the bylaw. So what the bylaw is including is adding the Director of Planning and Development to the Department Director's definition, as well as amending Section 11, and outlined here you'll see under A, liquor primary license amendment. So the delegated authority would allow for comment on increase in person capacity or the extension of liquor service by 1 hour or less, as well as that temporary expansion of service areas up until October 31st. Similarly, as well, those amendments for food primary license amendment. And then lastly, with C, manufacturer license amendment. would include lounge endorsements for liquor consumption, a special event area endorsement for liquor consumption, extension of liquor service for the service area limited to a maximum 1 hour extension, increase in person capacity, and again, the temporary expansion of service areas. So those are the three main delegated areas that Council's authority would then be delegated to staff. Again, if the bylaw is not to be considered, staff is recommending that that resolution be considered in place of. And with that, that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Palo. So just for clarity, should Council progress this and a business comes forward and says, we want to use Summit parking spots, this is where that particular application does need to come to Council, Council consider it, and then by resolution pass it? Or are you saying that we need to put a resolution tonight to enable you to consider that in those applications?
Well,
I
what we're
read
suggesting
it in
is
two
that
ways.
if you would like staff to consider applications that would utilize additional areas within the operation areas of a current business, that staff would take direction via a resolution from Council to make those considerations. So if you would like staff to, if Council would specifically like staff to look at allowing parking spaces, parking stalls, loading spaces, things of that nature, we can specifically look at and work with applicants to encourage them to consider the utilization of those areas.
So then you would need a resolution tonight, or you don't?
If Council would provide that resolution to staff, then yes, we would appreciate that tonight in moving forward with working with applicants.
I see. Ms. Michaud?
Through your worship, maybe I can provide a point of clarification. So what the bylaw is suggesting is that any existing liquor license holder within the District of Sooke that wants to make any type of amendment to their liquor license, this bylaw would delegate authority to the Director of Planning and Development to consider any application that comes forward. If Council does not wish to delegate that authority to staff, the direction given on May 25th to expedite applications for the temporary expansion until October 31st, that could be done just through a resolution rather than the bylaw, if that is the only delegation you want to make. Does that help make it a little more clear?
Well, I'll go to my colleagues and then I may have a follow-up. Councillor Beddoes?
Yeah, my concern is this is a temporary. I don't want to delegate this to staff all the time. It's just up until October 31st, so we can expedite those businesses which are really suffering and cut through some of the red tape. So whatever we decide here tonight, it expires October 31st. Is that correct?
So then you'll want to make the resolution and not proceed with the bylaw.
Okay. I understand. I'm not comfortable changing the bylaw. I'd like to make the resolution.
Okay. Hold that thought. Other members of Council? Councillor St. Pierre?
I'm just curious as to whether or not you have a sense of how many applications you might expect in the near future after the first one.
I don't have a specific number off the top of my head. I just know from the time of May 22nd, when the policy directive was first issued by the province, we've received one communication from a local business wanting to take advantage of this temporary expansion.
And following up on Councillor Beddoes' question, I'm curious about how other districts are dealing with this and whether or not this delegation of responsibility is something that's habitual, or I should say usual, if it's a common practice.
In reviewing the duties that would be delegated to the staff, this bylaw has been reviewed against other municipalities and is very similar in nature to the delegation of authorities that they have provided as well.
Thank you.
Anything else from members of council? Okay, I'll go to Councillor Beddoes.
Again, I feel my role in the community is to make these decisions. These can be very controversial in the future when it comes to liquor licenses and different things like that. And I think the buck stops with us, and that's where I like to keep it. And if there's flack from it, you're not going to blame a staff person, blame us. I understand the need to expedite things until October 31st, and I'm willing to make that concession, but I would not want to see this on a permanent basis. And it's similar to one we had before on variances, and my opinion has not changed.
So would something like this work, that council allow for the temporary delegation of all powers, duties, and function of council to the Director of Planning and Development to consider liquor license amendment applications for the purpose of temporary expanded services until October 31st, 2020 in response to Provincial Policy Directive number 2013? What I essentially done was on page 130, I just took that paragraph that starts, should council not wish, and I just wrote that council allow and took all the same wording. Would that suffice?
Yeah, I don't think it needs to say temporary delegation, because that's already in there by putting the October 31st date, that you're only delegating that authority until such date.
Okay, so that council delegate.
Yeah.
So, okay, so then it read then that council delegate all powers and so forth because it has a date.
Correct.
Okay, are you comfortable with that?
Yeah.
So Councillor Beddoes is moving that motion, and that'll be seconded by Councillor Lajeunesse. And then I think what I'm hoping is that if the second wave is as extreme as some say it is, that we would then, I think, need to regroup and say, okay, this needs to change, or this may need to extend, and I would sort of hope to see something returned to us that you're lifting this, but maybe you need to extend it because of X. Okay. Councillor Bateman?
So I take it in the case of this one business that this resolution will allow you to contact this business, and 2 weeks from now we will see your recommendation on that, and we'll have the opportunity to give them the
No. So what so the motion that Councillor Beddoes has moved now would basically allow staff to work with that application and then to give their recommendation off to the Liquor and Control Board and move it through the process. It wouldn't come back to us. But what I would like to see is maybe just an email from staff to council saying business X, Y, and Z has applied for this and staff have endorsed it and we have sent it off to the just so we know. It would just be helpful to know what is happening in the community and just to have that correspondence come back to us is all. And then, because we may get contacted by other businesses, and then we could say, okay, well, we have done this, it's worked very well, contact our planning staff, and they'll be able to take you through this process, and it's very quick.
Yes, with the understanding that the board has the final say on the application.
Right, the Liquor and Control Board. So staff is just sort of giving their recommendation, but it'll be up to the Liquor Control Board to make the final. But then just so that we know that staff has sent it off and now it's on to that entity to make the final determination. Just so we know, because we get all sorts of correspondence to us. Okay, so that is what we're moving. It will not come, none of them will come to us. And if things go well, then we can, starting November this year, then they would. Unless things take a negative turn, then we would need to look at that. Okay, so that's what we're voting on. Okay, everyone's clear? Okay, so I'll call the question then. All those in favor? Opposed? And then that's carried unanimously. So where I'm still a little bit fuzzy is, do you require a motion like this that says that council directs staff to consider the use of business operation areas loading spaces, on-site parking stalls, etc., as well as sidewalks, roads, or adjacent properties with individual applications. Or, like, that's the part, like, where it says a resolution is needed by council. Like, do you need something like that now, or are those the ones that would come to council because they're using those public spaces? That's the part I don't understand.
Those ones that are using public spaces, those would need further consideration by council as to how that will be addressed, because there would be other policies and bylaws that may affect them. But it was just something to highlight right now, is in terms of how we can assist with the business community. Other communities are looking at these types of things like public areas to allow for those expanded areas, but it's not something that we are suggesting at this time.
Okay, so then it's sort of a case-by-case basis then. So you only have the one application so far. So if that goes well, and hopefully it does, and then others, as they're opening, are like, man, we just really need to go onto the sidewalk or something, then we'll have that come back to us on a case-by-case basis. I guess what I'm saying is I would like to see us look at that sort of flexibility and that option for some of our businesses so that they can reopen. There's some, but like it's some, but not all in the community. So, and then of course we still want the community to be accessible and safe for people. I just don't want someone to come in and say, we could really use these 2 parking stalls and a bit of the sidewalk, and staff says, nope, we don't have any resolution by council, can't even look at it, not gonna happen. So that's where I'm looking for a bit, how can we consider that and do something there? So we don't need anything right now.
No, so a couple of things. I think that there were a couple of things that I heard in there. So on-site use, where they may use a parking stall or 2, that will not come back to council. If the request is to move on to public property, that would come back to council. Is that your understanding, Mr. Paulo?
That's correct. When the business is utilizing their own property, and for example, a loading space area where mainly that function is for a time delivery and otherwise would be vacant, we could work with businesses to utilize those time-specific areas that are otherwise vacant to encourage location in there, because it wouldn't have an impact on their business overall. It's those public areas where now they're either using adjacent properties that aren't typically connected with the business, or a public space or a sidewalk that then there's other liability concerns that we need to be taken into consideration.
No, that's good. Okay. Thank you very much for your patience as I struggled understanding that. Okay. Okay, so I think that is it for this report. This will enable our staff to work with the business, and we'll see what others may emerge from that. Thank you very much, Mr. Paulo. Okay, so item 9.1 is an item that I have brought back under the sort of special unique power that a mayor has to bring items back for reconsideration. And this is the one that we made regarding the Whiffin Spit Memorial Wall. The one part of this that just has, I've not sat well with me is the final piece and the contractor. And the reason is, so this is now back on the floor and we would need to vote on this, is that I want to see that removed so that it's just having everything else be fine, the awards postponed, staff will work and come back with either Whiffin Spit or Manuel Quimper with the SPA committee once it's formed, and the Sooke Nation, and the Sooke Nation would remain because they may or may not be a part of the SPA committee. But I just felt that sort of tying the contractor into this whole process, they responded to a request for quotes that went out in their artistic way. And what if what the SPA committee comes up with, they are unable to deliver on, or other ideas come, then it's all just sort of tied together. So I just feel that if we are required, if there's anything that, like any sort of payment that we have to make, then I need to know that. But I just think that we need to, you know, obviously treat the contractor fairly for whatever they have delivered upon, for sure. And of course, they would be welcome to bid on whatever it is returns, but just keeping them in this process just feels unfair to the contractor and to the process and to the SPA committee. Like, what if they come up with something completely different that the contractor is like, I just don't have that. I don't know. It's just, and that's where it just feels a bit awkward that they're remaining through this. So that's why I brought it back. Councillor Beddoes?
Yeah, I'm okay with leaving off the contractor. The contractor was asked to bid on a specific design that was given by the contractor, I believe, and that was rejected. And so that ends that relationship as far as I'm concerned. Now, my understanding when we talked about it at the time that there was no financial liability on our part by turning that down. And I think that was pretty clear the last time we voted on it. Is that correct? To staff, to the chair.
There may be some obligation, but what I can say with all certainty is that a contract was not awarded in this case. So going through with continuing to have the contractors part of the process going forward is not needed.
Okay, so what I'll look for now then is an amendment to remove, just to put in with the Sooke Program of the Arts Committee, and then an amendment to say and the Sooke First Nation period, and to strike out and he contractor. Right? So that's moved by Councillor Bateman and seconded by Councillor St. Pierre. And thank you. And on the amendment, were you going to speak, Councillor St. Pierre, or are you just voting?
I was going to say that I do agree with Councillor Beddoes that I don't think we need to tie ourselves to the contractor at this point in time. I also think that simplifying this issue is important. I think we've been dealing with this for a long time simply because of the number of different interests, and I think that if we can simplify the problem, we'll probably get through it more easily. So thank you for that. Thank you for bringing that back, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Anything further on the amendment? Okay, so I'll call the question on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment? And that's anyone opposed? So that's unanimous. And now on the main amended motion, please. Is there anything further on the main amended motion? Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? And none opposed. That's carried unanimously. Okay, thank you very much for that. Okay, correspondence requiring action. I don't believe there's any. Okay, so council verbal reports and updates. Councillor Bateman is going first.
All right. Among various Zoom meetings, the one I'd like to report on is the Vancouver Island Regional Library Board met last Saturday, 2 Saturdays ago. And as I mentioned at the previous board meeting, we learned that 11 contractors had been pre-approved for the tender, to receive the tender for the new library, and that tender has now gone out to those 11 companies, and they have a deadline of June 30th to report back. And after that, a winning applicant will be selected by Bureau. And beyond that, that's all I'm reporting tonight.
That's really good news.
Yeah,
yes, it is. Thank you. Just for everyone's knowledge, Councillor Bateman and I were chatting back and forth that it would be helpful for us to sort of establish a library timeline that sort of lists off the council resolutions and just sort of where things are, because there's a lot of misinformation going out in the community that, in particular, that the library was all set to build in 2018. And we knew that there needed to be a lease. We had to work out, do all the due diligence on the land, the archaeological. We needed to fund those things. They needed to apply for the subdivision, the development part. Like, there's all these other pieces. So I just think it would be helpful now to sort of just put the facts straight, and that we could use help from staff. Just, can you pull the resolutions that have been passed by councils over the years and just sort of list it. I mean, for myself, the library goes back to when Councillor Dumont was the representative and was really advocating for a new library. So it'd be nice to just sort of do the timeline and then show in more detail, more specifically in recent years of what's developed and what's happened. And I just think that would be important for all of our sake. Yeah, okay, so.
And seeing things happen.
And actually seeing, because there are like substantial, like the signing of the lease and all the due diligence, like those were significant, and funding those pieces were significant because they were not ready to build in 2018. They needed a development permit, all of those things that council needed to receive and our staff needed to process, and everyone has been very diligent about doing the part. So I just think that needs to happen. So if there's any assistance we can have just in pulling those resolutions, that would also help. Is that okay? Okay. Other updates? Councillor Beddoes.
Yeah, I just want to bring up that we've been attending these Zoom meetings with the Sooke Homeless Coalition, and they're working very, very hard to find some sort of base of operations so when Sea Park closes down for the homeless. But I just wanted to say that I was really, really pleased with a couple of the stories they had about lives they turned around, that having them down at the arena in a closed environment where they could get all the wraparound services, they were very successful in 2 cases that I know of, and getting people squared around and settled. And that's how it's done, 1 or 2 at a time. But I must commend that whole group for the heart they have for this community and the hard work they're putting in on this. I'm sorry to say we don't have a solution for them come the 22nd of June when they have to leave that location. But there are some successes there, and they did a bang-up job, I thought.
Thank you. Councillor Lajeunesse?
Nothing other than just echoing what Councillor Beddoes said. I hope that a location comes up where they can continue the work that they're doing, because I think it's a worthwhile endeavor.
Thank you. Councillor St. Pierre?
The Sooke Historical Society is continuing meeting via Zoom, and they've got a number of initiatives that are ongoing even with COVID happening. So some of the more interesting is they've had quite a bit of success, 35 to 55 people showing up for Sooke Trivia. And I've actually heard from people in the Lower Mainland who are participating or knowing about this, so the word is definitely getting around. Their online photos are now available for searching for anybody, and there's some wonderful stuff in there. And unfortunately, still looking to try and see how the night market can operate, so not sure what's going to be happening with that just yet. Other than that, the Climate Action Committee has been extremely active. The working groups have been active in putting forward recommendations and finalizing the working plan. And we've had 2 meetings in the last couple of weeks, so we're hoping that that will be reviewed by council on the 22nd, and looking forward to that.
Just a comment.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to pass on to Councillor St. Pierre. The donkey engine out front and center looks marvelous.
Yes.
And that took a long time to get that to happen. And that old piece of junk that was sitting in the back is now front and center with our history. So I'm very pleased that that's came about.
Yeah, it's looking good, and the sidings on the building, things are looking great. I would also like to just, as a note, extend many thanks to Jennifer Roya-Collard for all the work that she's done in the Zoom meetings and supporting the Climate Action Committee. So great work from our staff. That's
great. Thank you, Councillor St. Pierre. So since we met, just a few highlights for myself is I Zoomed with Girl Guides BC, so they have a Ask a Girl Guide on Zoom, and I was their last guest, as many of the guides were heading back to school, obviously. So that was kind of fun. And that led into Capital Regional District meeting, and one item that came up was the notice of motion about the Mountain Biking Advisory Committee. So that's now a go. With the budget, they're looking for volunteers, so that's really exciting to see movement happen there, and that'll all lead to a bit of necessary and long overdue policy development in that particular area. let's see here. And then you may know, as one of my responsibilities as UBCM president, is I'm also on the Order of BC Advisory Committee. So we met over MS Teams and did our recommendations. So very engaging, inspiring, and very in-depth process. I was able to attend a ceremony when our poet laureate of the Juan de Fuca was awarded Wendy Morton her Order of BC, but this year's celebration it's postponed. It'll be held next year, hopefully, with the 2021 recipients. So more on that to come, and the Chancellor, being the Lieutenant Governor, will make the final determination. We're just giving advice up, so that's exciting. I then also was on, it wasn't Zoom, it was another platform anyway, with MP Taylor Bachrach. He's the former mayor of Smithers. So he does a Facebook Live event every week, and I was his first guest, and he's the shadow critic for local government affairs or municipal affairs in Ottawa. So we were talking about the COVID impact on local communities, so I had the opportunity to do that. And then I was also in an urban economy forum with the UN Habitat, along with many other speakers last week, and that was also discussing the COVID impact on local communities. And what was 3 minutes, they were finally like, okay, we're running out of time, you need to make it short. So I spoke very fast for about a minute. So not my best performance, but I was practiced. I had it ready for 3 minutes. I didn't have it quite down, but at least the message was out there. Transit, as I had shared, commission meeting will happen next week. CRD will be in person. CPARC Commission, I'll be seeing Councillor Beddoes there. Our CAO, Norm McInnes, held a community economic development forum on Zoom. Myself, president of the Chamber, CERTA, our economic development group, and the Historical Society were all present. WorkLink as well. And as well as provincial contacts. So they'll be continuing on with the roundtable discussions, but the intent is that they will provide recommendations to council to consider at our upcoming priority session on economic development. And then, what else was I doing? I'm kind of all over the place. A few media queries came up with CTV News on Sooke reopening the playgrounds. And also on the mountain biking. I gave a written statement for that. And then I was also in another interview with CBC Radio out of Vancouver and just talked a bit about our code of ethics policy, which I feel we should actually discuss at an upcoming meeting. We all signed it when we first got into office, but I think it's always important, not necessarily to review it, but that we just see it, talk about it, and make sure that we understand the language, because it's an important document when things don't go well, let's say. So let's understand the rules that we're all governing by. We've all done our return to work policy and procedures training. So thank you for staff for putting that together. That was very informative, and I can see why our template has been adopted and brought forward for others. It's very thorough, very in-depth there. Sadly, some items like the Navy League ceremonial review would have happened. Our EMCS grad ceremony, I gave a video recording. They then had an event that the graduates could attend. I'm not quite sure when it's happening, actually, but the parents are still having to roam, but at least the students can be together, as you probably know. And then there's other ongoing meetings. You will have seen the federal government made an announcement about funding flowing through to the province on opening the economy, and they list off local government, but what actually comes to local government, I'm not clear on, so I suspect that clarity will come to us in very short order. You may know our peers at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities had lobbied for $10 billion of operating funds, and so I think we'll see what happens. And then later this month, actually, I'll be hosting a Zoom conference for transit impacted communities, because we're putting together an advocacy platform on transit. How do we reopen the economy without having full transit service? So there's some of that more to come, and you probably would have seen the emails, so I don't want to bore you with everything. But yeah, a lot lot of interesting times and getting to know different platforms, MS Teams, Zoom, Be Live. There's you get the invites, they work. That's great. Thank you very much to our IT department. We had a new component installed here, which seems to be working fine. So I think this is just important to note that any member of council, or 2 or 3, can join with MS Teams, and everything. The background is noise and all of that has been solved. So thank you to IT and all of our staff, and well done in the opening week. So we'll see what comes, and we're getting a lot of fun facts. I really like those, so please continue to send those to us, because it's just nice to see where things are. And I'll leave it at that. And back to the agenda here. We're looking for a motion to adjourn, please. Moved by Councillor Lajeunesse, seconded by Councillor St. Pierre. Thanks for hanging in there, Mr. Paulo and Councillor St. Pierre. We'll see you both in person soon. Until then, take good care of yourselves and everyone here as well. All those in favor of adjournment? And that's carried unanimously. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thanks.